right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I've got two pieces of news to tell you. I've got good news and very good news. Good news is that I finally was given IT access today, and I've got quite a big backlog of your emails now to read. Really sorry about that. So I've learned that someone was suffering from lack of air conditioning in this room for 5 weeks. And I only read it today. I'm very sorry. I'll try and sort it out. But the good thing is I will now be able to answer to all your queries within a maximum of 48 hours. And hopefully that means we'll have perfect communication. Now, the very good news is that we have a winner of the Nobel Prize contest. Well, we've got 3 mini winners and we've got 1 big winner. Congratulations, Alex. So Alex correctly guessed that Esther Duflo will be winning the Nobel Prize. But you get a whole coffee rather than 1/3, because this was still a very difficult thing to guess. Thank you very much. This year's prize was a bit unexpected because, as I might have told you, it's unusual that so many micro prizes are given in the same decade. But this is an unusual microeconomics prize. Even though Esther Duflo, Abhijit Banerjee and Michael Kremer do microeconomics, they do a very particular, very applied kind of microeconomics. They study poverty. Each year, Economics Network in this country asks students what they would like to study at economics courses. Very, very rarely students say they want to study Cournot and Bertrand models. I mean, actually never. The two topics which students across the UK really are interested in are inequality and Brexit. Your department hasn't heard you. Maybe they misheard you and they added some more inequality solution into your first year maths module alongside equations. But the Nobel Prize heard you, and they gave this year's award to economists who were really, really getting their hands dirty. And instead of writing theoretical models or analyzing World Bank data at their cozy computers, they actually went to Africa and India and performed randomized control trials studying what can help poor people achieve better outcomes, educational outcomes and life outcomes. And that's because economics has been long criticized for low external validity of its methods. We will mostly look at models in this module, and we know that as soon as we make one unrealistic assumption, the results might not reflect the real world. Now, if you probably have done some econometrics modules as well, right? So you know as well that what's the biggest problem with econometrics research? Causality, very good, yeah, because you can see correlation from your data, but whether it's causality or not is very hard to tell. For example, we can see that areas of the city where there are more trees also have lower domestic violence. That's a fact. And now you might be thinking, how does it work? Is it more oxygen that makes people nicer to each other in the family, or what's going on? And actually some city governments used this finding and planted more trees in bad neighborhoods, hoping it would alleviate domestic violence, and it didn't work. And you can guess why, because it wasn't really causation, was it? So what do you think actually is going on? Why are areas with more trees also have lower domestic violence? Yes, please?
Maybe because the people who are less prone to domestic violence happen to want to live in areas that have more trees.
Oh, very good. So we have a third factor which increases, which affects both.
It's like a reverse.
Yeah, reverse causality between trees and sort of people who live there. And then, so probably greener areas are more affluent, people who can afford to live there, probably those who have lower risk of domestic violence. Very good. Sorry, did you want to say something else as well?
If you know something about per capita, then it could be population density.
Population density. Oh, very good. So that would affect absolute domestic violence numbers, even if everything else is ceteris paribus, basically. Yeah, when we have more trees, we probably have low-story houses and fewer people per square meter. That's awesome. So you see, that's why when we just look at data passively and try and tease out correlations, we have very low chance of establishing true causation. So these guys, they said, we're not going to just be looking at data, we're going to go and, well, do the analog of planting trees and seeing how it affects violence. But because they studied poverty rather than crime, they went to Africa and they tried to pick to kind of very different aspects of primary school education, for example, and see how it affects student attainment. Because it's quite well known that education increases lifetime earnings and improves your future employment outcomes and your social standing, but unfortunately, not all children all over the world finish primary, let alone secondary school, and so they tried to check what was going on. So first, they tried providing students with free meals, and it didn't work. It didn't improve student outcomes. Then they tried actually making sure that teachers always attend, and that improved student outcomes, interestingly. So they were able to come up with very, very specific recommendations for the government to say, hey, look, the problem is not with the children at your schools, the problem is with teachers, they don't show up. So if you could try and well, employ either carrot or stick to make teachers show up, then you will have better attainment rates at school and better outcomes. So they did this, and another thing they studied was vaccination rates, because vaccination rates were quite low in some areas of interest. Well, in particular, they studied a lot of sort of scenarios in India where Banerjee is from, and they find out that if you offer a bag of lentils to parents, to low-income parents at vaccination stations, then vaccination rates increase tenfold. So they found that people actually have some sort of, as we call them in economics, continuous preferences over vaccinating their kids and having some high nutrition food, right? Parents are still skeptical about this, but if you remunerate them enough, they will lower their skepticism. Which is interesting, because in economic theory, we didn't expect it to happen. There are certain types of transactions where we thought in microeconomics people would be very unwilling to trade one thing for the other thing, and one of those things is your children's health. So if you very strongly believe for some reason that vaccination is bad for your children, we always thought that you wouldn't trade it for anything. But apparently that's not the case. So, and methodologically, the main contribution was employing fully randomized control trials. So that means they didn't just roll out this intervention, let's say, with teacher attendance in all schools, because then we won't be able to see the pure effect. And they didn't let schools choose, okay, we're going to try this experiment, so schools are welcome if they want to implement additional teacher incentives to help them show up on time. Because that wouldn't be a good experiment, because schools which are already better would implement these measures. So they chose schools by literally tossing a coin, and that helped them control for things, for all the factors which they couldn't directly observe. Yeah, so you see, it's very applied economics. So it wasn't expected at all that these people will win, because usually economics, well, Nobel Committee likes fancy stuff in terms of dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model and so on. Things like people in your department really like doing here at Manchester. Very, very hardcore researchers. Okay, Thank you very much. That's the second time ever I had a student correctly guess the winner. I'm very happy about that. Even more happy about my account. So now we can go back to the lecture. So it's not about inequality per se, but it's also a socially important topic. Remember, for all different strategic choices businesses have, which we explored so far, changing prices, changing quantities, differentiating, price discriminating, we looked at the effect of these choices on consumer welfare. And that's because most of human consumption happens through buying those consumer goods in markets. Market outcomes, hence, such as price and quantity, affect consumer well-being. So today we're going to be looking at strategic behavior of firms. It's the second of the two lectures in this topic. We're going to be looking at what firms can do to increase their profit by, well, going beyond choosing their own output and price. In particular, we're going to look at what firms can do playing together with other firms or against them, being slightly nasty, and how it will affect consumers. Remember when we looked at previous models, we always started with assumptions. We said, here's the market demand, here are costs, this is how consumers choose. So these things are all elements of the market environment. We said this is given, firms can't choose them, choice variable is something else. Now, so today we're gonna look at what can happen if firms actually try and change one of those things which we previously treated as given. Those things are collectively known as market environment, and these are consumer preferences, cost, technology, and so on. Also exit and entry elements. Because as you remember, all previous models we considered, we didn't look at entry and exit. We just said, okay, suppose there are two firms in the market, and we kind of assumed that there must be barriers to entry. That's why there are only two. So we're going to look at two types of behavior where firms try and change market environment. We're going to look at nasty and nice. Obviously, the ultimate aim of changing the environment would be to increase their profit, but depending what happens to other firms' profit, we will look at cooperative strategic behavior, for example, cartel agreements. So the main feature of cooperative behavior is that other firms' profits also go up, and that non-cooperative behavior, when other firms' profits go down. So examples of that would be like pretty illegal stuff like industrial espionage or sabotage, or also some legal but grey areas such as predatory pricing and limit pricing. We'll start with analyzing cooperative strategic behavior. First, we're gonna show why firms collude. And the reason they do so is because they can increase their profit by doing so. This isn't immediately obvious because when you think about it, if two firms in the market start behaving like one, yes, that's true that they now don't have to compete against each other, but on the other hand, whatever profit they earn, they will have to split between them. So the first thing we want to establish is that it will indeed pay. So let's use our favorite small model here and show the following fact. That even when you split your monopoly profits across several firms, still each of them will earn more than it would if it wasn't a member of a cartel. So we're going to look at our standard Cournot model with the inverse demand equal to A minus uppercase Q, which is sum of firms' outputs. you remember that? Oh, that died. Sorry. That's some old school microphone. I'm not smart enough to use this one. Things for singing, and we don't have a karaoke yet. So the cool thing about monopoly is that because there's only one firm, it has perfect free rein and it can choose whatever price and quantity it likes. So it will choose it by maximizing profit, equating marginal revenue and marginal cost. So you see what we do here, we don't break capital Q down into a sum of Q1 and Q2, because a cartel works as a single firm. And we just maximize profit with respect to big Q. By the way, if you prefer this method, because mathematically it's the same, equating marginal revenue to marginal cost, it's the same as differentiating profit and equating it to zero. But if you prefer it, you can also use it in a regular Cournot when they make decisions separately. So your revenue is AQ minus Q squared. Marginal revenue is the derivative thereof, is A minus 2Q. You equate it to your marginal cost and rearrange to find optimal output. So you see optimal monopoly output is A minus C over 2. Do you remember what Cournot output was? Very good, A minus C over 3. So individually it's smaller, but because there are two firms, it will be 2/3 of A minus C. So it will be bigger. So the other way to establish it is to divide monopoly output by 2 and see how much each firm produces. Now, cartel's profit is revenue minus cost, and you can see that here what happens compared to Cournot is that the denominator is 4 rather than 9. Of course, they have to share it between them, so each of them gets A minus C squared over 8. But this is better than A minus C squared over 9. It's not a big difference, but if you think about firms in a duopoly where already we have high barriers to entry, earning millions or billions, then that could make a significant difference. And that's why so many firms try and collude with each other, or if they're not allowed to collude, they try and merge. For example, you know that Sainsbury's tried to buy Asda last year, and this deal was blocked by CMA. And that's because they didn't want this to happen. They didn't want them to start earning higher profit at the expense of consumers. Now, okay, I went to a teaching conference earlier this year, and we had a very old, very distinguished American professor who flew to Warwick to give a talk. And his talk, he said, there's only one sentence I want you all to remember. Good economics is nuanced economics. I repeat, good economics is nuanced economics. And I think he should have repeated it 10 more times, because that's what most undergraduate economics modules really lack, isn't it? We solve the model for a certain outcome, and we don't look at different details which could change it all. So it's all very well to say, oh, firms earn high profit, they collude, so that's something to do. In reality, there are many conditions for it to happen. So first, the more market power firms have, the easier it is to collude. Can anyone tell me why it is the case? Okay, remember, let's remind ourselves what market power was. It's the ability to raise your prices over and above your cost. Yes, please?
It's going to be easier for them to raise the price together. So like when they collude, it's going to be easier for them to raise the price.
Okay, so colluding is raising your price together. So it's the price fixing is the most widespread form of collusion indeed. And if you don't have this much room for this action you take together, then it's harder to implement it because it's a change which has transaction cost, legal cost included. And the more room you have to implement this change, the more likely it will outweigh the transaction cost. Very good. Weak anti-cartel legislation. Well, that's pretty obvious, right? Because the legal cost is the most serious transaction cost you have here. Just to be sure, anti-cartel legislation is different, obviously, in different countries. And the main difficulty that the legislator has is trying to control different tacit collusion practices. Obviously, if firms have a cartel, they will try and communicate in kind of covert way. And so what this legislation usually controls is all kinds of communication between businesses. Lots of communication happens at trade fairs or conventions or business conferences. It's very difficult to block this. So, so it's a real challenge. For example, this country doesn't have a law explicitly looking at and prohibiting industrial espionage, whereas America does. And the reason why is that because the US is really strict on antitrust legislation, and they think spying actually can help firms collude with each other. So not actually spying on each other, they're trying and fix prices by pretending to spy on each other. And things, if you look at the different practices firms do to price fix, some of them are pretty mental. For example, employing business consultants is usually just a cover-up because this consultant would just transfer messages between competitors in terms of each other's price and cost. And that's what you actually pay them instead of business advice they give you. So it's not always easy as just passing a law saying cartels are prohibited, because you're not going to change anything by doing that. Now, okay, we already mentioned cost of collusion and how it can be an obstacle. Now, small number of firms, high market shares of each firm, and more closely related products all facilitates collusion as well, because that makes it easier for firms to fix prices at an agreed level and monitor them. Because obviously, if there are many firms and if their product is slightly different, agreeing on prices is harder because there are more details to agree. One of the ways how firms fix prices is at a business meeting, firm managers enter their market price or market share on a pocket calculator and pass it under the table to each other. So you can only enter one number there. So if you're producing differentiated products, you can't take this into account. Trade associations, again, because they're the main channel of communication between businesses, make it easier to collude. So these are just a few things. Now, next question we ask is if colluding is so easy, why don't all oligopolists collude? Because in economics, we like assuming everyone is as cynical as possible. One piece of research I'm doing these days is about demand for digital music. And all the existing papers, they say, why is it that 38% of all digital downloads in the world are obtained through copyright infringement? Well, why are they illegal, in other words? I think we should actually ask a different question. If there is so much free music, why is it that 62% of people still pay for it, right? And so there are good reasons why they do. But same question here is, why don't all collude? Why don't all oligopolists collude if that's so lucrative? Well, first, cartels are forbidden by law in most countries, even though firms can sometimes try and merge. And this is why Competition and Market Authority in this country reviews mergers and acquisition applications more than anything else, more than actually policing firms. By the way, that's one of the most lucrative jobs you can do after your degree, is working for business consultants who prepare basically reports proving it to Competition and Market Authority that the merger isn't going to increase prices. Or if it does, it actually will be in consumers' interest somehow. And the way to write this report convincingly is basically to pay your staff very well. But because these consultancies are privately owned, unlike the CMA, the CEO of a business consultancy earns about, I can't tell you the figures, but my very good friend works there. So the ratio of, yes, top salaries would be like 2.5 to 3 times. That means that basically, if they want to, they can convince CMA that the merger is legit. So in many, many cases, that's why so many mergers are still allowed, even though each and every merger pretty much leads to prices going up, is because companies are happy to pay consultants to convince CMA on their behalf. Well, some mergers are blocked anyway. As you know, on the European Union level, more mergers are blocked precisely because they have more resources to look into each case. Now, the second reason why not all oligopolies collude is because cartels are intrinsically unstable. So agreeing to fix the price relies on every firm sticking to the agreement, and it turns out that actually cheating on the agreement is an individually rational thing to do. That's why even country-level cartels such as OPEC aren't always successful at keeping production low or prices high. And again, remember we go back to maths, because maths proves that what we were saying in words is actually true in terms of logic as well. That's why we like it. Because if we could only use words, we would be like these consultants writing to CMA about mergers would say, price is not going to rise, promise you that. Now let's remind ourselves of profits firms get in and out of a cartel agreement. So we're going to look at 2 firms, and we're going to assume that the starting point is both of them sticking to the cartel agreement. Remember, if they stick to the cartel agreement, together they produce the monopoly profit of A minus C over 2, means they produce A minus C over 4 individually, rather than A minus C over 3 in the Cournot output. Now, why would the firm consider actually producing more? There are 2 effects, a pro and against. So what are the two effects on the firm's profit if it decides to produce more? Yes, please?
They either both make very high profits, or if one of them cheats, both cheat and make very low profits.
Very good. So it's a high-level trade-off there, right? So yeah, if you're the only one cheating, you will end up with higher profit, but you risk retaliation from the other firm. So let's check that. So first, why is it that we are sure that the firm who's cheating is producing a higher profit? And that's because of the externality it imposes on the other firm, while suffering less of it itself. Basically, if you produce more, you're gonna decrease the market price for everyone, for both firms. You yourself, of course, will suffer as well, but at least your production will increase and will compensate, more than overcompensate, for a falling price. So suppose firms 1 and 2 both stick to their agreement to start with, and so they each earn A minus C squared over 8. Remember, compared to A minus C squared over 9, as shown before. Now, if one firm actually unilaterally deviates to Cournot quantity, we can show it will produce higher profit. Okay, so that's a big ugly expression for price. But you can see how it's derived. We just subtract those two different market quantities from A. Now it's slightly harder than the regular Cournot because quantities aren't the same. One firm produces more than the other. But because we're still in the identical product world, so you can think about OPEC and oil, the price they face is the same. So firm 1 deviated. It decreased the price for them both, but it itself at least sold more. So, and we can show that this deviation actually pays. Well, first, we'll definitely earn a higher profit than firm 2, because they face the same price, but firm 1 produces more. But actually, we can also show that it earns higher profit than it did as part of the cartel. Because 5 over 36 is actually more than 1/8, because 36 is less than 5 times 8. That's actually something I quite like about Cournot model. Even though we didn't assume any numbers to start with, it's a purely general model, we end up with some numbers which we can compare and make a conclusion. But just to give you guys an intuition behind these numbers, is that each firm is able to produce slightly more, and because it only has a partial effect on the price, it will, the prices will plunge a little bit, but it will still be able to capture a bigger enough market share to compensate itself for it. Whereas the other firm, you can see the order of these numbers. 5 over 48, the profit of the other firm is the lowest possible number. So it's even lower than Cournot profit. So the other firm really is in very big trouble. Now we can put these two choices firms face to stick to the cartel agreement and produce a lower quantity, which is the first row in the first column, and to cheat on the agreement and produce Cournot quantity as the second row, second column. Now, you might ask me, why is it that firms who want to deviate will necessarily deviate to Cournot quantity? And that's a very good question. They actually won't. They will act more like a Stackelberg producer and pick an even higher price. But if we look at the dynamics of retaliation, firms will converge to the Cournot quantity as a result of retaliating each other's deviations. So it's as if instead of having a very, very long and very, very deep table with lots of rows showing how they respond to each other, we just look at the final result. So here what's happening is, here we have 4 different profit values, right, for all possible combinations of strategies. But we can replace numbers with just words, high, low, very high, and very low. And you can see that this table actually has a prisoner's dilemma structure, doesn't it? So any game has a prisoner's dilemma structure if 2 conditions are met. Could you tell which ones? It has to do with the order of payoffs. Because see, if we can replace numbers with words high, low, very high, very low, it's just the order matters. So what's so special about where this high and low payoffs are in this table? Can you tell me? Okay, so I think you actually gave an answer to this earlier. You were several steps ahead of us when you said that firms are better off individually cheating, but when they both cheat, they're both worse off. So one important characteristic of the prisoner's dilemma is that the Nash equilibrium is Pareto inferior to a different outcome. So you see that with red font here, we denote the best response. And we see that firms will converge to high output, means cheating on the cartel agreement. And their profit in this case is lower than if they both stayed with the cartel agreement and produced low output. It's not the case for all games. For example, in the Battle of the Sexes game we looked at in Lecture 1, the equilibria are Pareto efficient. People going to the same, two people ending up in the same party is best for them, and that's actually what they will choose as well. But not all games have this structure, and very many strategic situations in life, such as using green versus polluting technology, fishing a lot and fishing sustainably, has prisoner's dilemma structure. You are better off individually fishing a lot, using the cheapest technology, but in the end we all end up having depleted resources and dirty atmosphere. So that's the first characteristic. And the second characteristic is that there is a dominant strategy here. Again, not all games have a dominant strategy. For example, the Battle of the Sexes game doesn't have a dominant strategy. Game of Chicken doesn't have a dominant strategy, and so on. By the way, because we established that numbers don't matter, it's only the order of payoffs matter. And also we know that the labeling of players doesn't matter, which one is firm 1, which one is firm 2, and so on. So can you think about what's the total number of possible games in life, in game theory? That's quite a hard question, so I'm going to leave it for you if you're interested. But if you can come up with the number of games, then that would be great. We can have it as our next contest. By the way, FYI, Alex chose soy latte as his coffee. I have to disclose it by my labour contract. So, soy. Yeah, very good. Yeah, 1 gram of protein from soy produces 300 times less CO2 than 1 gram of protein from cattle industry, isn't it? It's very good, but there's no pressure. You can go for frappe with whipped cream if you want to. Okay, but you will be able to tell there are not many games in the world, and then there are already 5 Nobel Prizes in game theory, whereas there are not so many games in a 2x2 world. Okay. Another thing I wanted to tell you about this is that collusion agreement can happen across 2 dimensions. Firms can agree to fix prices or to fix quantities, depending on what is their main strategic variable. And don't forget that if they fix prices, prices are high, whereas if they fix outputs, outputs are low in the cartel agreement. Okay, so we said that, again, going back to nuanced economics, our model predicts that firms will always cheat, but in real life they don't, because we still have quite high prices in many markets, which can be viewed as an evidence of cartel agreement going on. So cheating is harder if firms have increasing marginal cost. Can you tell why? This one has to do with output fixing rather than price fixing. Yes, please.
Because if, in order to cheat, like, you have to increase your output by quite a lot to make the most of it, and then if you're doing that, then your cost is going to increase, and you're just not getting as much profit.
Yeah, very good, thank you. So yeah, your opportunity cost is your increasing cost of production, and if they're increasing at increasing rates, then that makes it much less profitable. Very good, yeah. Do you reckon most businesses have increasing marginal cost or constant? Increasing, very good, yeah. Because linearity is a lot to ask. In reality, because you're employing several resources, as soon as you start increasing your output by adding more and more of one factor, you're out of an optimal mix of resources, and your productivity goes down. And if you think about industries where cartel agreements are prevalent, lots of them are high-tech pharmacy, and their marginal costs are indeed increasing because lots of their cost is R&D. And in other industries such as oil, again, marginal costs are increasing because of basically limited oil fields, and also very, very expensive technology they use. Okay, many small customers making frequent orders, again, makes it harder to cheat. Can you tell why? So this has to do with price fixing rather than output fixing in this case. Yes, please?
The gains would be lower because if lots more customers won't cheat before your competitor notices you're only going to sell a small amount relatively.
Very good. Yeah, so there are actually two reasons you named, isn't it? So first, it's going to be sort of your competitor will notice faster because there are many transactions you make, and so they're easier to trace. And secondly, because they're all individually small, yeah, your gains will be smaller from doing that. Single sales agent for all firms. Well, I guess that's pretty clear, isn't it? Because this agent can be easily bribed to tell the competitors what you're doing. Now, detecting cheating is easy if there are fewer firms. So, as you pass your calculator with your price under the table, there's less chance it will fall down and break. Factors affecting demand and supply is stable. This has to do to attribution of responsibility rather than actual monitoring. You can always claim that you increased your or decreased your price because your particular components got cheaper and so on. Now, prices, well, strategic variables of individual firms are widely known. That's pretty much saying that monitoring is easy. And as we already discussed before, that the ease of monitoring of online purchases is the reason why prices for air tickets increased once they started to be sold mostly online. Because this facilitated not only customers buying their tickets quickly, but also airlines monitoring each other's price and punishing airlines which were offering discounts. And again, identical product makes it easier to monitor because we can agree on one price and just religiously follow it. Now, there are also many different ways in which you can prevent cheating, and one of them to fix other factors other than price and output. For example, quite a while ago, the predecessor of Competition and Market Authority, which was known in Competition Commission, said that the fact that UK banks don't offer interest rates on current accounts is actually evidence of collusion. Obviously, banks tried and claimed that it's just just the interest rates are low these days, but the regulator didn't believe them. Now, basically, not just fixing prices, but fixing things like market shares and agreeing who is whose consumer. You can probably see that from mafia movies, where each service provider works in a certain area. And using trigger prices, like airlines do, when they decrease their price as soon as they see the other airline does it, all serves to facilitate monitoring of cheating. Okay, so that was what we wanted to talk about cooperative behavior. Do we have time? Shall we have a break and go back here at 5 to look at non-cooperative, the nasty strategic behavior? Hello. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. I mean, most of it is just a standard model, so I think introduction and conclusion are the most interesting parts.
But I think we're looking at the wrong indicator. The price of competition is much higher than the price of not cooperating. So if we, again, the map example, they have stores in different areas. If we didn't only compete in the same area, then competition was opening huge stores in the area, market prices, employees, employee wages, etc. That's why I don't compete in location. It's only a small factor, but it's a big factor as well. So we need to look at the cost of not competing versus the cost of cooperating. Cooperation, not cooperation. So it's proving that it's beneficial for them to cooperate. Besides, we can't prove it. Because it could be like both directors going to a room, agent, and they're not open stores and like minimize agents. Okay, that's it. And it could be labeled as a business strategy. And we don't compete in location. We can't prove it.
So you want to look at the opportunity cost of not colluding as opposed to the opportunity cost of colluding. Yeah, that's a very fresh thought. I like that.
Because we can't prove it as well. As I told you, it could be labeled as a business strategy. Why don't we? Because I checked the map in Manchester. I have to check it. And I did the data mining from both companies. Couldn't find business consultants. I couldn't find any links. Lidl has Ernst & Young, Yellen's KPMG, as auditors. I tried to check that as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Could be just a friendly meeting, like, hey, don't do this, okay. Because think of corporations as a big family. Like the director's incentive to cooperate is not his salary, but it's the help of big companies. Everyone included. So it's not only one person, it's the whole firm.
So you reckon it could help that Aldi is not a public but a limited company? So it links your director's fortune with...
They do have data on the company's website in the UK. I did not see that, but I looked at it and there's nothing we could use. Plus Lidl has private information, so in their annual statement, they said like we use this, I think I wrote the system down, but they have some private financial information that's not disclosed to most employees except directors. And it's mostly automated. It's to do with the system they use for accounting. But there's no possible way to do it. I don't know.
That sounds very cool. Yeah, I think especially Aldi, because you know how in Germany there are two Aldi companies owned by two brothers, and they split the country in half between them. One of them does North Germany, one South Germany, and they basically agreed not to compete with each other, and that's how they still earn profit.
So it's
kind of what you said about the map. Yeah.
Could make sense. And I figured out why Pepsi and Coke, like we have our preferences, and why it's successful. So it's like, yeah. I can catch you afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cheers. Yeah. Thanks for waiting. Yeah. Okay, so this one.
I just told you,
Yeah.
this equation I told you.
Yeah.
We get 2 at the end. If we
what multiplied by 2 gives you this. Yeah. I guess that's the way.
And then it's like a minus cost, right? So then how do we get A minus C? I'm so confused here. Isn't it revenue minus this?
Yeah, I guess. Oh, sorry. Let me just get. Okay, so is it profit is revenue? It's revenue management. So basically, your revenue is price times quantity, isn't it? And your cost is C times quantity.
Isn't price A minus Q?
That's right, yeah. So I think I was just factorizing, yeah? See, both those terms have Q as a common factor, so we can factor it out, and then we'll have this, that here, and this. Okay, do you agree with this? And then, because, let's say now we factorized, we want to expand the brackets again, but because this is different from, these are parameters, and this is a choice variable, so we want to have it separately, because we want to have a linear Q and quadratic Q in two different locations. Do you agree that this equals this?
How do we get Q squared?
Also, with this one, we're multiplying by it.
Oh, okay. So you multiply this by this and then you took this out as well.
I mean, you don't actually have to do it. If you're more comfortable with just expanding this, yeah. So can we just get to here without having to do it like this? Okay. So starting from here. So A minus. So what Q is equal to this much? Yeah. I think I actually started from here even. Minus C times Q. We want to have the same denominator here, right, to deal with this. So what will we get here if we want to try and put A on top?
So you multiply this, right?
Very good. And this stays as it is because we did the denominator, and then we have to multiply C. Okay, so
Expanding this, right?
yeah.
Basically revenue minus cost.
Yeah, and that's because we already know what Q is in terms of parameters. It will be great to see what the profit is in terms of parameters. Okay, so opening up these brackets, that's what we get. And we might as well expand this Q, yeah, so that's what it is. Oh, sorry. 2. So what do we get here?
So you get A
Very good.
and then C
Yeah, will it be with plus or minus?
minus.
Very good.
Minus C. Oh, okay, let me get
That's how we're going to do it.
So when you're in the office, how do you come in?
2 to 4 on Mondays just before the lecture. But if you would like to see me some other time, would you rather see me at the time?
The lecture on Mondays from 3 So
Would you like to see me on Wednesdays?
yeah, so I could send you an email and writing this and then you could copy me this lesson.
Yeah, we could meet like university. Yeah, because like there are tables there.
Also for the exam, it's choice, right? If you want to choose the mathematical question or the theory question or the prophecy.
You don't have to, so there will be. So at the very last lecture, I'll give you like a list of models which can come up. Some of them are mathematical, like this. Some of them are more logic, like how to make it work. Or we will look at another also logic-based model later. So yeah, you will not see it in the exam. You will have to choose 2 or 4. You don't have to choose 1.
It's your choice.
It's your choice. Oh, thank you for asking. It's always good to clarify anything. Thank you. Right, guys, shall we go back to the lecture? Okay, so we've considered what firms can do to sort of do well while doing good in the business world only. We mean in terms of firm welfare rather than consumer welfare. How can they increase their profit while increasing their rivals' profit, and obviously decreasing consumers' welfare because prices are going to be high under cartel agreements. Now let's see what happens if firms try and employ a nasty strategy where they increase their profit by decreasing the profit of their rivals. So we're going to look at several such strategies. They all have to do with limiting entry, because we can also look at how incumbent firms compete with each other in this nice ways, using limiting entry as a model. But in general, apart from limiting entry, firms can drive existing rivals out of the market or try and sabotage it and reduce its size as a result. Now, just like with all non-trivial market strategies such as price discrimination, there are some conditions which need to be met for a firm to successfully employ a non-cooperative strategy. Think about driving a rival out of the market. The standard textbook way to do it is to first lower your price to a level where your rival can't compete. Your rival exits the market, and then you become a monopolist and you raise prices to the monopoly level. Many firms have been accused of doing so, low-cost airlines and Uber among them. But the important thing here is that this strategy needs to be credible, right? Because if firms are symmetric, they both theoretically could do that. So if you were to employ the strategy successfully, you need to have an advantage over your rival. So we'll be looking into what kind of advantage firms can have. It can have lower costs, it can have a bigger size, it can have certain know-how, but importantly, all these advantages can, at least in theory, be replicated by the rival. For example, low cost, which is usually due to superior technology, can be mimicked by a rival. A big size, which is an advantage, because it gives you economy of scales and an ability to charge lower prices, can also be mimicked by a rival if they take out a loan. So if financial markets in the country are developed, then it shouldn't be a permanent advantage. So this is why we will argue that predatory pricing and limit pricing is actually something which is hard to achieve in reality. Now, the second condition for a firm to employ a non-cooperative strategy is to be able to credibly commit to a strategy. So remember in the first lecture we looked at dynamic games, and we said that solving dynamic games by backward induction eliminates incredible threats. You can threaten someone with a very bad outcome for them, but it's also a very bad outcome for you. They're probably not going to believe you. So this is why governments try and not negotiate with terrorists, because usually when they suggest they're going to blow up a bomb, they will also die, and so governments are not particularly credulous of these claims. In our world, in the business world, there will be no bombs, but there would be threats of dramatically lowering the price. And it also is like a suicide bombing for a business, because it will suffer as well while doing that. Okay, so we're going to look in particular at 4 non-cooperative strategies, and they are predatory pricing, limit pricing, investment to lower costs, and increasing rivals' costs. So the difference between predatory pricing and limit pricing is that predatory pricing is used against existing rivals, whereas limit pricing is used against potential entrants. So predatory pricing is the same as dumping. A firm lowers its price drives competitors out of the market, like what we saw in Seminar 1 with Bertrand asymmetric cost model, and then enjoys monopoly profits. As we said, one of the conditions for the strategy to work is for the threat to be credible. For example, if it's understood that the firm only keeps prices low for a particular time and then hopes to increase them afterwards, then what prevents the rival from also keeping them low for exactly the same time? So there has to be an advantage of the firm who does it. And as we said, in the market economy with free access to financial markets, any advantage can be replicated. It's akin to the Chicago argument. If you can, if another firm can employ this and increase its profit, then I can do it as well. So this advantage is hard to obtain over existing rivals, and also hard to obtain over potential rivals, because a potential entrant can, again, mimic your business strategy. So the only sort of copyable advantage incumbent companies may have is reputation it has. So if it develops a reputation for fighting off potential entrants, then it may become a non-contestable monopolist. There is a model which looks into it. It's called chain store paradox model. We're not looking at it here because it's a repeated game with potentially infinitely many stages. It's quite complicated. But the gist of it is that a firm needs to pretend it's crazy enough to fight the price war up to the point of its own bankruptcy. And then develops a reputation for being tough. Now, limit pricing is a similar strategy, but it's used to deter entry rather than to drive existing competitors out. So, by setting a price very low, the incumbent firm dramatically decreases its own profit, but the entrant's profit decrease even more, because it will have to invest in setup costs to enter the market. So in reality, this threat isn't credible because it's not in the firm's interest to fight the price war. It would have a high profit by simply entering this new world of duopoly with lower profits, but still not as low as the price war profits. This is, again, a game we looked at in Lecture 1. The two players are the entrant and the incumbent. First, the entrant decides whether or not to enter, and if it stays out, which is what strategy O indicates, then its profit is 0 and the incumbent's profit is 10. Remember, in game trees, the first number at a terminal node is the payoff of whoever was the first mover. Here the entrant is the first mover. So they get 0 and the incumbent gets 10 if we end up at O. If the entrant does enter, then the incumbent has a choice of accommodating or fighting. So remember how we showed at the first half of the lecture that the sum of duopoly profits is lower than the monopoly profit by itself. So if it accommodates, meaning, okay, we're going to compete in a non-aggressive, Cournot fashion with each other, but they will both lose. Both firms will earn collectively less than the monopolist did before. 3 plus 3 is 6, which is less than 10. Now, if the incumbent fights, they will end up with a lower profit still than the profit from peaceful coexistence, but the entrants will suffer even more because they've already incurred setup costs. Now, remember how we solve this game by backward induction. We start from the very last mover, which is the incumbent firm. So what will the incumbent firm here, A or F? A, very good. Yeah, 3 is better than 2. And knowing this, the entrant enters with confidence. Because even if the incumbent threatens to start a price war, the entrant knows it's not going to do that. It's not going to harm itself. For example, your lecturer tells you, if you don't attend your lecture, I will give you all bad marks in the exam. It's an incredible threat because we are told off very seriously if you guys get low exam marks. So this is something to let you know. So you might think, so is there any way out of this? Is there any way to make your threat credible? Because any communication you might have between the firms wouldn't be a credible threat because talk is cheap. You need to employ some form of costly information transmission, which is known as signaling in economics. And one such signaling, costly signaling, is adoption of inflexible technology. It sounds like shooting yourself in the foot because we know that flexibility is a good thing. The bigger your choice set, the higher your maximum element of this choice set in general in mathematics. But it turns out that in a dynamic game like this, by committing to a fixed output, the incumbent firm actually can prevent entry. And this forms an advantage which an incumbent firm can have over the entrant. Because you can't change the past. And that's basically becomes the only non-mimicable advantage of the existing market firm. So this is a new game where the incumbent firm moves first and they have a choice of technology. Remember, the choice between accommodating and fighting in the previous game was basically about the incumbent firm lowering their output to the corner level, or fighting means, no, I'm going to keep my output very high. I know that will mean that once you enter, the prices are going to be very low and we will both suffer, but I'm going to do that to fight you off. And of course it's not credible because we solve for corner equilibrium and we know that best response curves are downward sloping and you don't want your output to be too high. So the one way to make this credible is to somehow commit to a very high output and say, I can't reduce it now because I installed this inflexible factory equipment which allows me to produce this much and I can't drop it when you enter. So here I kind of suppressed what happens after the entrant enters, but because because we already know what happens on the flexible technology, it will be in the incumbent's interest to accommodate. We can suppress that bit of the tree, and we can already predict that with flexible technology we will basically be in the previous tree. When the entrant enters, they end up in a duopoly world. But if the entrant enters on the left-hand side after the incumbent already built a factory which can only produce this much because of how it runs, then they are in a price war world where the incumbent keeps producing monopoly output. So let's solve this game by backward induction. Now the entrant is the last mover, so it will be looking at the second payoff. But now, because this game has more terminal nodes, we need to pick the entrant's choice in both possible situations it can find itself in. That's how you solve trees by backward induction when you have more vertices. So in the left-hand side, would the entrant enter or stay out? Stay out, very good. 0 is bigger than -1. How about the right-hand side? Would they enter or stay out? Enter. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, because again, they know that they will be accommodated if they do. And once we can predict what the last mover does, then the first mover, being as intelligent as us, can predict it too. And now the incumbent knows that if it chooses inflexible, it will force the entrant to stay out and keep earning a monopoly profit. And if it chooses flexible, it will end up in a duopoly world, and it chooses the monopoly profit. So you see, you limited your own choice, but you ended up in the best possible scenario you could be. You said, well, I'm going to have this Damocles' sword above me, which will fall onto me regardless of my actual decision once we reach this stage. But you never have to exercise this threat, because the mere existence of this negative scenario and the mere credibility of it keeps the other party out. So it might actually pay to burn your bridges, as this game shows. Now, a slightly less exotic strategy the incumbent can employ would be to lower costs. Remember how we looked at Bertrand game with asymmetric cost, and we found that the more efficient firm earns higher profit. We didn't look at it for Cournot, but you can believe me, it's the same as well. Because remember, Cournot outputs, equilibrium output, have A minus C in them. So, wait a minute, does it mean that's a good thing? Yes, because lower Q means higher price. You can believe me, because it is true. If we have Cournot with asymmetric cost, a lower cost firm earns higher profit too. So let's see, would that work here? Let's say lowering your cost is a choice. Usually to lower your cost, you need some sort of technological innovation, which is achieved through R&D. So that's something which is a one-off investment you make, and hopefully it drives your whole cost curve down. Let's see if R&D investment is successful in preventing entry. Now the incumbent has two choices, excuse me, R&D or no R&D. If it doesn't do R&D, again, we end up in a basic model. Monopoly versus duopoly. Now, the critical thing is that R&D doesn't pay in the monopoly world. And that's why monopolies are often accused of being very sort of backwards, not innovating enough, which is indeed the case. If you think about monopolists, they usually offer quite bad customer service. That's because they have no incentive to innovate. They're quite dated in all technologies they use. So this here is represented by the lower profits which monopolists get if it innovates but stays the only firm in the market. Now, let's see, does it still work? What do you think? Can anyone tell me straight away, without performing best response analysis step by step, is entry prevented in this game? No, very good. I could see, yes, several people saying that. Why is that? Which side of the tree will we end up in? Okay, so if we are here, will it be E or O on the left? Enter, very good, yeah. If we're on the right, it will be E or O. Enter, good, yeah. Either way, the entrant will enter. There's no preventing it. But out of two situations when the entrant does enter, the incumbent will choose the payoff of 4 over the payoff of 3. So even though R&D can't prevent entry, it improves the incumbent's outcome. And that's because, unlike the monopoly, in an oligopoly market, investment does pay off. And that's why both Apple and Samsung invest so much money in technical innovation. Because undoubtedly they do have the nature of a competitor if they innovate. Notice how R&D doesn't only increase the incumbent firm profit in case there is competition, it also decreases the other firm's profit. Because as well as reducing cost, R&D has an effect of shifting your demand upwards. If consumers now see your product as superior, they will buy less of the competitor's product. Okay. Now the final type of strategic behavior is increasing rivals' cost. Now, it's like in adventure movies. There are two ways you can throw your arch nemesis from the rock. You can either go with them, or you can just try and throw them on their own. And going with them is usually easier, and that makes for a very dramatic movie ending. Same here. You can, of course, try and increase your rivals' costs unilaterally, but it's quite hard to achieve, because their costs are usually up to the technology they employ, and that's something you have little sort of power on over, short of sabotaging their premises. You can, of course, try and interfere with their production and sales, or maybe if you have certain political influence, you can try and lobby for more stringent regulation of your rivals, but that's hard, because regulation usually applies to the whole industry, rather than just your rival. Now you can try and employ tie-in sales, which we looked at last week. Remember how you capture more of consumer surplus by forcing your consumers to buy a good they didn't so much need. But if they do that, if they have to buy from you, they will buy less of your competitors' goods because of diminishing marginal utility. Or you could try and raise your customers' switching cost in a dynamic framework. So do you know of any attempts, maybe of businesses you buy from, to try and prevent you from switching? Yes, please?
Waiting with 5 or 6 hours to try and cancel the contract.
Is it,
Especially with like BT.
right, especially with someone with big market power, BT, very good. Yes, so you have to wait on the phone with them 5 hours. Is it just in the queue, or will they have to send you through different stages, both? Very good example. Anything else? Any other providers making it difficult? Yes, please? They offer you a deal. Yeah, so it increases the opportunity cost of your switch. I agree. Yeah, because you're missing out on a deal if you do switch. So it's not out-of-pocket cost, but opportunity cost does go up. Yeah. Yeah. Well, get 12 months contracts with the internet provider is also a form of increasing the switching cost, because you'll have to pay a fine if you leave early and so on. So you see, there are things which a business can do, but they're usually not straightforward. Now, sometimes it's easier to try and increase everyone's cost in the industry. And this is something we're going to look at again in a game theoretic form, because it's a type of shooting yourself in the foot, isn't it? Or burning your bridges, which makes you more likely to fight rather than flight from the enemy's point of view. So we talked about trying to increase your rivals' wages as one example of non-cooperative strategic behavior. You can increase everyone's wages by lobbying for high minimum wage. Or you can increase everyone's environmental costs by lobbying for more stringent pollution regulation. And remember, all this only works if there is an advantage one firm has, and if it's a credible threat. So again, an advantage here is that the incumbents' setup costs already have been incurred, so they're sunk. So they're not, when they're increasing everyone's cost, of course everyone's cost goes up, but the sum of fixed and variable cost of a potential entrant might go up by as much as to be higher than their revenue, and then they won't enter. Whereas for incumbent firm, because they don't take fixed cost into account, they might be just below it. So in the end, they want their fixed cost to be as big as to end up with the rival and themselves either side of this break-even point. So let's see how that works diagrammatically. Again, the incumbent is the first mover who has a choice of shooting themselves in the foot. It's a little bit like Brexit negotiations, isn't it? So the UK can do certain things which would make it harder for both it and the EU to trade in the future, like the Irish border and so on, and can try and use it in negotiations with the EU. But in general, all negotiations are hard because of a certain psychological effect called loss aversion. It's always harder to give something up compared to the joy of getting it in the first place. And renegotiating something always involves trading something for something else, giving up something you have in exchange for gaining something from the other party. But because we value things we give up more than things we gain, it means that when we try and renegotiate who gets which size of the pie, you always will feel hard done by, even if objectively what you're getting in return for your concession is of equal value, you will feel that it's of less value. And that's why, because of the status quo bias, many negotiations seem to be in a deadlock. So we can see it affects not only individuals but also countries. So, okay, back to this picture. What is happening here? Okay, so by how much does the incumbent increase everyone's cost here? Can you tell me? If they choose the left-hand side. You can tell by looking at bits of the game where there's no competition at play and comparing them. Oh, actually, you'll be able to see it from competitive bits as well. Yeah. So what's the size of a new environmental tax which the incumbent can lobby for? Can you tell me? 4. Very good. Yeah, because looking at monopoly profit, at the profit at the end of O vertices, on the left-hand side, the monopolist ends up 4 units less. And so obviously they wouldn't like this to happen. And does it actually happen? Is entry prevented? Yeah, very good. Yeah, because by lobbying for this high cost, they made it unprofitable for the entrant to enter in the first place, because they don't break even anymore. And they'll choose to stay out, and the monopolist will end up with a reduced but still a monopoly profit. So back to you. Which do you think will be the most desirable method of preventing entry from a monopolist point of view? We looked at inflexible technology, R&D, and increasing everyone's cost. Which one would they prefer? can hear someone saying inflexible technology, right? And that's right, because they don't, by doing that, they don't risk anything in the end. That's where their first mover advantage is fully realized. If they know which technology gives them the biggest profit, by basically making it their only option, they're not sacrificing anything in the end. Okay. I think that's actually everything I wanted to show you today. So if you don't mind, we'll finish. But I will stay here until top of the hour if you have any questions to me. So, yeah, thank you very much, and see you next... Oh, wait, there's no lecture next week, isn't there? Because it's your reading week. So there'll be no lecture, no office hour. But if you want to see me, drop me a line and I'll just meet you outside of regular hours. Thank you. Hello. Oh, that's right, I do experiments, yeah.
How experimental are we talking?
Well, we're talking about laboratory experiments rather than field. So, yeah, I've got participants in the computer room making choices. Sometimes it's playing games with each other, which kind of mimic business situations. Sometimes it's making real purchasing decisions. So this demand for music experiments I mentioned today is, yeah, basically I was selling real music albums to participants, and they first received money, and then they could bid.
What are the topics you're researching exactly?
I do a bit of industrial economics, and I do a bit of social preferences, psychology kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
Because you asked about the Coke versus Pepsi at the first lecture.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So.
Do you know why?
Tell
Do you
me.
have a theory? Or,
I personally don't. So can you? Do you have an idea?
well, it's actually a fact. So, do you know who made Pepsi, Coke in the first place? It was a pharmacist. And he
right.
put cocaine in Coke. Now cocaine can be absorbed by your stomach, only by your mouth. They put cocaine, so when people drink it, it's absorbed, dopamine is released, you're kind of attached to it. The government bans it. So you know fizzy drinks have caffeine in them. So we're literally drunk as kids to drink. So we drink Pepsi Coke as kids, it's okay. But it's a small amount, around 35 milligrams. And as kids, it's a very significant amount. And for women as well, it's very significant. My mom can't sleep if she drinks Coke at night.
Wow.
But this amount is significant enough for you to link pleasure with taste and with the brand. So as a kid, whenever you drank, whether Pepsi or Coke, as an adult you'd have a preference and choice. And you would drink it. Also, it could fuck up kids a lot. Like this amount of caffeine. Sorry for swearing. But
That's
it's
alright, yeah.
very bad for kids to drink fizzy Coke or Pepsi.
In terms of addiction or in terms of
No, in terms of
harm?
brain function.
Oh, right.
It's very dangerous. Not very, very dangerous, but could result to, especially ADHD.
So I guess on the scale of harm and addiction is quite high on both for children,
Not addiction,
right?
But it's more of it's a small amount. Like it's not significant to cause addiction, but enough for your brain to link pressure and preference of brand. So you're kind of hooked on drinking one of them, but you don't know why. You don't know you're being drugged. You don't know there's caffeine or dopamine being released because of the drug. It's like kids drinking coffee, but they don't know why. And then they start drinking fizzy drinks for other reasons. Like if you drink Lidl's fizzy drink, you won't get the same pleasure. Or if you drink Coke or Pepsi, also because it's fizzy, the absorption of caffeine is more efficient in the stomach. That's a specifically significant amount of kids.
Wow, so and it wasn't true of original Coke with cocaine then, because it absorbed in the mouth, I guess,
Mostly
regardless
the
of
mouth.
whether...
Cocaine is not functional in the stomach. So smaller times, like while you drink Coke in your throat and in your mouth, it's get absorbed, but a tiny amount. Not enough to get high, but enough to release enough dopamine to link. Suddenly, it's like Pavlov's theory.
Oh yeah, Pavlov's dogs, yeah.
Yes, it's kind of similar. Like you would feel like you need it, but you don't know why. It's very accessible. Like you feel like drinking a Coke, you drink a Coke. It's very easy. That's why we keep buying them. Our kids, like my parents, drank Pepsi. I drink Pepsi, and now I go out of my way to get Pepsi, while others go out of their way to drink Coke. Coke is not available to get like 7 Up. But it's the same theory. They drug customers over the period of 80 years to have a preference of their drink of choice. Other companies can't do this because Coke and Pepsi already did it. The market is closed, same with energy drinks. But that's the reason.
That's awesome, thank you very much, that's great. Yeah.
No worries.
Right.
Is it possible to... Actually, you can go for the others. I'll
You
go
sure?
for your email.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I've got no office hours next week, but yeah, we can meet outside
Yeah,
if you
that'd
want to
be
discuss
great.
that. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. See you. Well, it's because sorry, I got a pen somewhere. Well, because when you're cheating on the cartel agreement, that means you produce more, and when you produce, increasing marginal cost means it's increasing in output. So, okay, indeed you earn higher revenue by producing more, but you get much higher cost. Whereas if it's constant, and it's practically increasing your Q means it's, all gain, no pain. Yeah, I guess that's why. I think it's simpler than you thought. Cheers, thank you.
We didn't actually really understand your tree diagram.
The trees.
At the end, I have them in here. I think it'll be easier.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which one would you like to go through?
They're all the same. They're the same concept, right? So any would do.
Absolutely. So with these trees, it's basically like your game theory table, but they make their decisions in turn. And excuse me, so we can put names of players on points where they make decisions. So at nodes, right? And then we put their actions, which they can take on edges.
Okay.
So what happens here, the entrant either enters or goes out. Yeah. If it goes out, then the game is over. The first payoff is the payoff of the first mover. So if you don't buy a lottery, don't buy a ticket, don't win a lottery, right?
Yeah.
And whereas the second one is the payoff of the second mover. So in this case, it's the incumbent. So they own monopoly of top 10.
Yeah.
Now if the entrant does enter, then the incumbent can choose. Basically the choice they have is to, kind of agree to reduce their production slightly to accommodate the other firm. Or they can basically keep the production output high.
Yeah.
But that you can only keep your output high when you now have competition if you dramatically drop the price. Otherwise you won't be able to sell it. Imagine your shop opening next to you. If you want to sell as much, you have to lower the price. And because you already incurred your fixed cost, you don't need to sell your sales cost. The low price can suffer less than the other firm. Remember, the first payoff is always the payoff of the first mover. So they can actually suffer very much if you start a price war against them.
Okay.
Imagine a supermarket seeing another supermarket opening right next to them, and they drop their prices so low that the other supermarket has to drop their price to the same level because they're literally next to each other. But they've just paid so much for their new building, they just go out of business.
Okay.
It's never a good idea to have a price war because that's why it's called accommodate. So the incumbent themselves will suffer as well, but they will drive the entrant out of the market. So now the question is, will they actually do that if it comes to it, if the entrant enters? Because it's worse for them, and here we'll look at the second payoff.
Yeah.
We've
But
seen
is it
they
always
won't.
that it will have a lesser profit than if they accommodate?
Yeah, because remember, accommodate is what we get when we solve for an equilibrium. It's mutual best response. It's the stable situation. That means it's best for them of all possible variants. It also will be bad.
Okay.
What about in this case? Because I think you start from the bottom to the top. Don't you? Could you explain it a bit as well, please?
Well, because the reason we couldn't start from the start is because, for example, the entrant choosing between these two things, he doesn't know what will happen here.
Yeah.
Whereas the incumbent, he knows what will happen because he's the last mover. So we did kind of the same way as with tables. We look at numbers and choose the higher one. But we need to remember whose number is whose. So the incumbent is the second mover, so they will look at the second numbers as their numbers. So 3 is higher than 2, so you pick this.
That's what. Yeah, of course.
And then that means that this is out of the question.
Yeah.
Now we've done the last level, we can do the first level, because now the entrant knows that if they choose this, there's no uncertainty here. They will end up here. And so they're choosing between 0 and 3. And of course they're choosing 3.
Yeah.
And that's why we kind of start with this, with highlighting this one. And once we have highlighted it, we can highlight one of the top strategies.
Okay. So in this case, then, we're gonna start by seeing how the entrant is gonna see the situation in here
Very
from
good,
the
yeah.
bottom, right?
Yeah, so which number will we look at? The first or the second?
Or the second higher one.
The second, yeah, because entrance is the second mover, because we're looking, that's the first, that's the second, so that this are the entrance layups. And we're comparing them in each case.
Wait, so in this case, isn't the entrance the second one?
Yeah, that's why it's highlighted in detail, right?
Zero is better than minus one.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why
better
they're
to
gonna
stay
choose
out.
this.
Remember what this means. It means that the monopolists basically commits themselves to keeping the output high. That means they have to reduce the price. So basically it's like he doesn't have a choice to accommodate. He basically set their production to a certain level, and there's no way they can adjust it because the production line is running at the same speed. Technically it's not very easy to do, but if you really want to, you can just do it. But the beauty of the situation is that you won't have to, because the entrant always suffers more
Yeah.
from a price war.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is fight or is this flexible and inflexible?
Flexible and inflexible.
Okay.
It's just because it's the
Because we're talking
previous
about
choice,
inflexible
yeah.
and inflexible technology.
So in all these extensions, because we looked at the basic model and we said, won't work, this will never be chosen because of this equilibrium analysis, so it's not a credible technology. So what else can the incumbent do?
Yeah.
Their natural advantage is that they're already at the market, so they can do something quickly before the entrant even
Yeah.
makes a choice. And these are possible things they can do while they're already at the market. Yes, so that will be flexible and flexible, that's no research and development, and what the other one will be
The
no
cost.
cost, no cost. But we always solve them just starting from the end. But these more complicated trees, there are two possible scenarios which the entrant will find himself in. So that's why at the second stage we need to make two choices. And then once we know, so here for example, as you said, we're first determining what the entrant does.
Yeah.
So looking at the second number, 0 is higher than -1, they'll choose this. Then we're looking at, it's a separate choice, right? Because it will never have a choice between all four.
Yeah.
Because either the incumbent adopted this technology, this technology. So we need to make a decision separately. But here again, looking at the second number, well, technology is flexible. I know that they will start producing less because now I'm here.
Yeah.
They will have to, otherwise the price will be very low. They wouldn't go for it. So they will choose 3 over 0. And now the first mover is now the incumbent. And now when they're making their choice, again, now for them there's no uncertainty anymore because we solved the second stage. He knows that either this or this will be played. So now
Yeah.
he's comparing 10 and 3.
So he's gonna go for inflexible so that he can get 10,
10
instead of 3.
Yeah, because 2 and 10 out of the
Yeah,
equation.
yeah.
Yeah. That's how it
Okay.
goes. So mathematically, that's how we solve all of them. First, we deciding what will be the choice of the second mover in each of the two possible scenarios, and given that, we then decide what the first mover does.
Mm.
No,
But
we
these
would-
numbers are just arbitrary, isn't it? It doesn't really say which of the three techniques are better, massively better. Or does this?
Well, it does, because here your monopoly profit is exactly the same as it was. Because nothing in your situation changed. You have the same cost, you have the same demand.
Yeah.
Whereas here what happened, you already invested in expensive R&D.
Okay.
And for monopolists, it's not, because usually when you invest in R&D, yeah, it's expensive,
Yeah.
but sometimes you can improve your product so much that more consumers are going to come and enjoy it.
Yes.
But it's a fact that monopolists don't pay off. That's why monopolists such as British Airways actually have worse service than comparable airlines
Yeah.
who do compete with each other. They will often receive complaints about not being good enough. Or, for example, train companies.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about Virgin Trains, but I think they're not trying very hard to have good service between here and London, because they're the only producer.
Yeah.
And that's because innovating doesn't pay when you're a monopolist.
Mm.
So that number will always be lower than this number.
Okay.
And the same with the last one then, so.
Yeah, basically, obviously, increasing your cost is like a classic shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
So then this, but this still lower than 10 in the first example that we had.
It is, yeah, but they don't really have a choice here, right? Because it's the entrant that chooses, and they will choose these ones, yeah, because 0 is better than -1, 3 is better than 0. So the incumbent is choosing between these two.
Yeah.
And 6 is better than 3.
Sorry, someone said, or I think you mentioned that the cost is of 4. Is it because we're comparing 6 with the 2 with the 10 from here?
Or we could, equivalently we could compare it
between
with
these
this.
two.
Yeah, because this is no cost, no increase. So yeah.
Okay. So the difference in these two numbers is the cost that they are going to
For-
increase for everyone.
Yeah, actually here as well. Yeah, because what changes, here's competition, so there's lower demand for each firm, but the cost will stay the same. The cost doesn't depend on whether you are the only firm or competing. Your cost is
Okay.
basically your cost. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's always better to to come and talk, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
Cheers.
Thank you. So right now he's in his final year. That's why. But then, yes, but then he still have last year of like masters.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, BA Econ. Or you say BA Econ or MBA?